During the 1970s, a program was created to ensure that America's allies could face the Soviet Union's air threat. The ensuing FX program would develop a unique model that could confront the MiGs without using any compromising technology that could fall into the wrong hands. Thus, the Northrop F-20 Tiger Shark was born, a light fighter that met all the requirements. But as author Steve Pace pointed out, it was arguably, quote, one of the best fighters that never went into production. Bureaucracy. During President John F. Kennedy's administration, the U.S. Department of Defense was tasked with finding a fighter aircraft that could be offered to their allies. Through the Mutual Defense Assistance Act, the U.S. would select an inexpensive model that did not feature compromising, leading-edge technology so that it didn't fall into Soviet hands and risk national security. In April of 1962, the U.S. Air Force informed the Secretary of Defense that an aircraft had finally been selected. It was the Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter. The International Fighter Aircraft Program was created as Soviet MiGs became increasingly common and a significant threat, and the Allies needed an equivalent. The U.S. Air Force then submitted a request for a lightweight fighter that could stand against the MiGs. Among several companies that submitted a proposal, Northrop's F-5 stood out, and an upgrade of the F-5E Tiger II was announced as the winner in late 1970. Over 1,000 aircraft were eventually produced. An initiative eventually stemmed from the 1975 Air Force program FX to develop a new fighter that would outperform the F-5E. However, the new model could not employ advanced avionics systems currently used in other U.S. aircraft. The ultimate objective was to provide a low-cost export frontline fighter to the nation's allies to compete with the latest Soviet fighter threat, the MiG-21. Moreover, unlike previous programs in the Mutual Defense Assistance Act, the FX would be entirely financed by the private sector. Such companies would be banned from marketing the aircraft themselves, as sales would be handled by the Department of Defense. While Northrop's model would allow U.S. allies to sell the FX fighter without exposing important military advances, the political environment in the late 1970s and early 1980s would place strict restrictions on sales, severely limiting the model's potential. Design and development. The Northrop F-20 Tiger Shark was an evolution of the F-5E model series of the F-5 Tiger II line. The concept was initially developed under the designation F-5G, but gradually became its own design. The F-20 seemed a lot like the F-5 on the outside, with its sharp nose cone and the cockpit well after the nose section, but not yet midship. Unlike the F-5E, this aircraft had a single General Electric F-404 engine buried in the aft fuselage, with two elongated rectangular intakes along the sides. However, the outtake was a single exhaust chunky ring under the tail rudder. The engine also provided 60% more thrust than the two old General Electric J-85s combined. Consequently, its thrust-to-weight ratio improved from 1.0 to 1.13, its speed was over Mach 2, and its ceiling was over 55,000 feet. The Tiger Shark's initial climb rate was 52,800 feet per minute. Although the F-5E's wing profile remained unchanged, the leading-edge extensions were modified, improving the maximum light coefficient by 12%, while the wing area increase was a mere 1.6%. A single vertical tail fin and low-set horizontal planes made up the empennage, whereas the main wing had swept-back leading edges and straight trailing edges. Plus, the wings were clipped to hold the standard Sidewinder missile, and the wholly retractable undercarriage was a conventional configuration of two main legs and a nose leg. Initially, the aircraft was rather sluggish in terms of pitch. Hence, the horizontal stabilizer was increased by 30%, and a new fly-by-wire system with dual channels was installed. The construction of the F-20 would employ composite materials, and different areas were redesigned during development to use fiberglass instead of metal. There were also plenty of upgrades in the mechanical parts. Its avionics suite was innovative and a considerable improvement from older designs. The multi-mode General Electric AN/APG-67 radar offered several air-to-air and air-to-ground models and was the centerpiece of the sensor system. The older navigation system was also replaced with an entirely electronic version based on a ring laser gyroscope. Therefore, the total time from power on to takeoff was reduced to around 22 seconds, the shortest scramble time in contemporary aircraft, according to Northrop. The cockpit was changed entirely, and beyond visual range capability improved. The new version featured an immense heads-up display, two monochrome multifunction displays highly placed on the control panel, and a complete hands-on throttle and stick control system, or HOTAS. This configuration allowed the pilot to keep both hands on the control system while keeping the instrument panel at reach. All these improvements amounted to arguably the most reliable aircraft in service back then. Furthermore, the Tiger Shark was fitted to handle most of the weapons in the U.S. arsenal, from Mark 80 bombs to AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles, or AIM-9 Sidewinder and AIM-7 Sparrow air-to-air missiles. The F-20's main competitor, the General Dynamics F-16, could not fire the Sparrow until the late 1980s. Like the rest of its F-5 family, the F-20s were equipped with two nose-mounted M39 cannons. However, production aircraft might have featured two lighter Ford Aerospace Tiger Claw cannons instead, with a higher fire rate than the M39A2 they were based on. But there were also some issues due to the fighter's small size. The aircraft had a shallow ground clearance because of its low-mounted wing, and the landing gear position needed loads placed in the outer ends of the wings, limiting hardpoint weights to 1,000 pounds. Only one hardpoint beneath the fuselage was able to transport a heavier load, such as a single Mk-84 2,000-pound bomb, or even 5 Mk-82 500-pound bombs. Another disadvantage was that its payload and range were limited in comparison to the F-16. But while the F-20 was significantly more expensive than its predecessor, the F-5E, it was less costly than other options on the market, including the F-16. In fact, life maintenance costs were around 50% lower than the F-16. Ultimately, the budget-friendly design was planned to consume 53% less fuel and to have 63% lower operating costs, while being 4 times more reliable than the competition. Testing. In late August of 1982, the F-20 had its maiden flight. The flight lasted 40 minutes, and the prototype climbed 40,000 feet and reached Mach 1.04. The results were beyond promising. The first customer came in November, and it was Bahrain. South Korea was also interested in producing the F-20 locally, and some improvements were implemented, expanded fuel capacity, and fiberglass composites to facilitate and support the production. By the end of April the following year, 240 flights were accumulated, and 10 potentially interested nations performed evaluation flights. Several negotiations were simultaneously taking place, which appeared to be a positive sign. Even ace Chuck Yeager said, quote, "Of all the airplanes in the world that I have flown, the F-5 is the most fun to fly." In 1983, a second prototype took to the skies, featuring a complete avionics suite. The test program included the missile essays, and the Sidewinder and the Sparrow were assessed. Several experiments followed with rockets, bombs, and firing rounds. One of the main characteristics of the Tiger Shark was its ability to fly at 124 kilometers per hour at a 35-degree angle of attack. In contrast, the F-16 was limited to 30 degrees. During these flights, acceleration from Mach 0.9 to 1.2 was achieved in 29 seconds, while the climb to 40,000 feet happened in 2.3 minutes. Destiny. In May of 1983, the Air Force signed an agreement to certify the F-20's performance, airworthiness, and fixed-price program. Meanwhile, the Tiger Shark was already being marketed within the American services. The U.S. Navy was looking for a new fighter for its Top Gun program of dogfight training. They specifically sought an aircraft that could match the current Soviet fighters, but the Navy ultimately went for the F-16. As the Air Force itself did not purchase the F-20, it doomed the line and any further developments, not to mention its acceptance into the global market. Insufficient endorsement from the service was regarded as proof of its value, and the international orders were cancelled. 3 prototypes had been completed, and a 4th was under construction with several new ideas. Still, as Rand Corporation said, quote, "Northrop did not take a prototype approach with the F-20. The first F-20 was intended to be a production-quality aircraft." At the time of the project, Northrop Corporation's private endeavor cost amounted to $1.2 billion, and the model was never sold to a foreign party due to bureaucratic setbacks and lack of support from the government. The company eventually gave up and canceled the project for good in 1986. Prior to the program's termination, the Tiger Shark flew 1,500 flights. However, 2 tragic accidents might have also contributed to canceling the program. In 1984, pilot Daryl Cornell crashed during a demonstration flight in South Korea. And in 1985, Dave Barnes crashed at Goose Bay, Labrador, while practicing for the Paris Air Show. Both pilots blacked out due to excessive G-forces, clearing the F-20 of any fault. As impressive as the F-20's design was, aviation experts agree that it came out at the wrong time, as the F-16 Fighting Falcon, with similar cost and multi-role capabilities, was favored. As such, the Tiger Shark never fulfilled its destiny to become the Cold War era's light fighter star. Thank you for watching our video. Please give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels for more exciting historical content. Also hit the bell icon to get notified about our newest videos.